of Willamette Women Democrats 2021 season. We are 27 days out from Election Day. Voters' pamphlets have begun arriving and ballots will be in the mail on the 14th. A reminder that if you know someone who for some reason is not yet registered to vote, they have until next Tuesday, October 13th to register. Ballots will be in the mail beginning on the 14th. It's been a wild ride, so hang on, do everything you can to encourage everyone you know to vote, and please vote early. Early next week, W2D will be sending out its slate card and recommendations on some of the county and state ballot measures, as well as elected officials. So please watch for your inbox. We will have time for Q&A, so please feel free to drop your questions into the chat as soon as they occur to you, and we will get to as many as possible. Last May, right around the time of the primary election, we began talking about this program. We had endorsed current DA Mike Schmidt for the Multnomah County District Attorney position. We were very pleased when he was elected, and we thought that this month would be a perfect time for him to come in and talk about some of his plans. Little did we know what was going to happen over the course of the summer and how relevant in today's terms the conversation was going to be. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Claudia Black, who is a member of our board and our program committee, and she will introduce our guests for today. Claudia?
Thank you, Veronica. Hello, everyone. I am very excited to welcome both Senator Lou Frederick and District Attorney Mike Schmidt for our program today, and they're going to be discussing criminal justice system reform. I think you'll agree that the topic couldn't be more timely, as Veronica said. It's my pleasure to introduce them to you now. Senator Lou Frederick was elected to Senate District 22 in Portland in 2016 after having served in the Oregon House of Representatives since 2009. He serves on a lot of committees, but particularly on the Joint Emergency Board and many Joint Ways and Means committees, including Education, Natural Resources, and Wildfires. He also serves on the Joint Committee on Transparent Policing and Use of Force Reform. That's a bit of a mouthful. He has an eclectic educational background, having studied biology, theater, and political science. He's a lifelong learner and is currently a PhD candidate at Portland State University. A little known fact about Senator Frederick is that he's visited every state in the union except Alaska, and I'm not sure what impact COVID's going to have on those plans. You may remember Senator Frederick as a reporter at KGW Channel 8 as the director, and he was also the director of public information at Portland Public Schools. Professionally, he is a strategic communications consultant. Senator Frederick has for years promoted criminal justice reform. His focus is on, and I quote, justice and public safety, education, economic security, and quality of life. Senator Frederick's experiences during the civil rights movement cemented his lifelong commitment to service and improving people's lives, and it's no wonder he sought public office. Recently, the Black Lives Matter movement has rightly intensified the demand for reform. As a member of the Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Caucus, he has recently been deeply involved in the passage of bills that help hold law enforcement officers accountable. He will be discussing those and other reform bills on the docket for next legislative session. We look forward to hearing more about his work after remarks by District Attorney Mike Schmidt. Mike Schmidt ran for District Attorney this year on a platform of bringing major criminal justice reform to Multnomah County. His bold, progressive vision inspired voters who overwhelmingly supported him with 76% of the vote in the May primary. He became district attorney in August, 6 months early when his predecessor retired. I'm getting used to saying DA Schmidt instead of Mike, so bear with me. DA Schmidt became interested in criminal justice reform after teaching high school in New Orleans and seeing firsthand the school to prison pipeline. His desire to interrupt the cycle led him to study criminal law at Lewis and Clark. DA Schmidt accepted a position at Multnomah County District Attorney's Office after law school and worked there for a number of years, but he felt he wasn't able to have the impact on the system that he'd hoped for. So he went to work as Judiciary Committee staff at the legislature. That led him to Oregon's Criminal Justice Commission, where he served as executive director, mining data on public safety issues. As you will hear, DA Schmidt uses data to drive charging and sentencing policies. He wants to ensure they're effective. I guess you could actually call him a data nerd. And here's the amazing fact. Mike's wife was pregnant during the campaign and gave birth to their second son in February. So with the campaign and a new baby, not to mention a new job, protests, COVID, and wildfires, 2020 has been a very busy year for him. So we're going to start the discussion at the local level with DA Schmidt and then move to the state level policy with Senator Frederick. Mike, could you please start us off?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Claudia. And it's great to be back and joining you, even though it's virtual. But I remember this was one of my first big meetings when I got to get up in front of everybody. And Veronica was like, "You cannot go over 2 minutes." And I think I did that. So it's good to be back with you all and give you an update because, wow, so much has happened. You'll recall when I spoke with you last, we were talking about issues of what were we going to do with people who are experiencing houselessness and also getting wrapped up in the criminal justice system. We were talking a lot about behavioral health in the criminal justice system, restorative justice, and a lot of those themes persist. But like you said, Claudia, little did we all know that after May 19th, on May 29th, George Floyd would be killed by police officers. And that would launch our nation into what some are calling a reckoning and a recoming of the civil rights era again. And so that really has kind of put us on a path. And it's been fantastic in a lot of ways, been very challenging in a lot of ways, but there are tremendous opportunities to do the reform things that we wanted to do and that I talked about you in the beginning. So I'm happy to give you an update on how things have happened. I feel like I've been the DA for about 2 years now, but it turns out it's been 2 months. But so much is packed into every single day. And I think we're probably all feeling this, right? Time has never moved faster and slower simultaneously. It's a little disorienting. But I got started, like Claudia said, on August 1st. And really it was immediately into, at that point, where we had been with over 2 months of protests. And that situation had already morphed several times. We started off immediately following George Floyd's killing with about a month before then the feds came into Portland and the federal courthouse became the object of the protests. And then that lasted for a month. So starting on August 1st was really jumping into the middle of an incredible situation of challenge in the local community. Our law enforcement professionals had been going for over 60 days at that point, and they were running very thin. And people were still demanding reform and not seeing the change that they wanted to see happen in our government. So one of the first things that I had to do getting into office was deciding how my office would deal with protest cases. And here's some background that's little known. When I started, there were about 550 cases already in the pipeline. But because the Justice Center was closed down and because of the COVID pandemic, most of those cases, no decision had been made on them, but the decision had to be made right then. And so what I did was exactly what we talked about during the campaign. developed a policy that focused on where is the biggest return on our investment for public safety. And so I focused this office's resources on anybody who is doing property damage, harming other people. And that kind of got us kicked off to where we were on August 11th, announcing a community-driven, community-led policy that we have been pursuing ever since here at the District Attorney's Office. And so, you know, it's been a little bit tumultuous as we figured out the relationship and navigating some of the hardships with law enforcement locally. But it was important for me to make sure that we were honoring people's right to assemble, honoring their right to speech, not using the criminal justice system to stifle that, but at the same time, keeping us safe and making sure that we are holding people accountable when they are damaging things, when they're damaging property, when they're hurting people. That way, everybody can protest safely. And so we've been working on that for the past couple months. And just this week, in fact, yesterday, we did something else that is something that I talked to you all about, which was releasing a data dashboard on our website. So for the first time ever in the state of Oregon, a district attorney's office has published all of the data, and we've started off with the protest cases in an interactive online data dashboard. So you can go on there and see exactly what charges have been referred to our office. And we look at demographics, race, age, crime type, to increase transparency into what's happening in our local criminal justice system. So that has taken up a lot of my attention and time and working on that. But that hasn't meant that the other things that I wanted to do when I was running in the beginning, we've been working on in the background. We've started conversations about setting up restorative justice programs in this office and in the community. It's at the very beginning stages, but we need to build the infrastructure in our community to handle cases in a restorative way. We're looking at the early stages of building out a conviction integrity unit. A unit that will look at old cases to make sure that we got it right, work with organizations like the Innocence Project so we can make sure that nobody is in our prisons or jails if they aren't actually guilty of the crime that they're there for. And also just being considerate about and thinking through, maybe if somebody was sentenced 20 years ago, the way that we were sentencing people then might not be the way we would do it now. And so we've been handling a lot of clemency petitions and working with our governor's office to consider whether or not people who have served a large amount of their time are safe to be released back into our community. So a conviction integrity unit, restorative justice work, and then data and transparency. So it's been an eventful first couple months, but I think what you'll see is that a lot of the themes that I talked about, not overusing our criminal justice system, being thoughtful about who needs to be prosecuted for actual public safety reasons, and then being mindful that sometimes convicting and prosecuting people can put barriers in their path that makes them unsuccessful in life, and trying to use that as sparingly as we can. So those are some of the themes. It's been incredibly busy, but it's a challenging time, there's no doubt, but it's an exciting time. And I'm so excited to be here with Senator Lou Frederick, who's been working on these issues for so long in our Senate and in his life, helping bring about criminal justice reform. So I'm excited to continue the conversation about where we can go from here.
Well, Mike, thank you very much. I am, this is really quite something. I'm so pleased to have you as DA. I just want you to know this sort of reinforces what we've been hoping for a while, is folks like you running for offices as a DA and other areas and getting things accomplished. I just got to say that one of the key things that I'm looking at right now is the fact that there is a BIPOC caucus, a Black, Indigenous, People of Color caucus in the Oregon legislature. When I first arrived at the Oregon legislature in 2009, in October 2009, when I was the only African-American in the House. Jackie Winters was the only African-American in the Senate. And I used to joke that I would go over to the Capitol and we would tilt the Capitol just a little bit, just because the two of us were there on one side. It was a very different situation. Now there are 9 people of color in the Oregon legislature, 4 Latino, 4 African American, and 1 Native American who are there now. We will probably, and my estimate, will probably have at least 2 more join us, perhaps as many as 5 more join us in the legislature. And not only is it just numbers, but because of the legislature, we are in different committees. So we are able to talk about things and work with issues that people were not really involved with before, or didn't think we were involved with before. I remember everyone expecting me to just be involved in education or just involved in human services of some form. Those are very important things, but I wanted to also be involved in talking about the environment, and I wanted to be making sure that we were doing things in terms of economic development. So I have been able to do a lot of things, and now my colleagues are heads of those committees, chairs of those committees, are very vigorous committee members, and head of judiciary in the House, Janelle Bynum, the chair of the Committee on Public Safety, the co-chair of the Committee on Public Safety for the Ways and Means Committee is Senator James Manning, and he's also, the 2 of them are chairing that committee with the long name regarding police transparency. There are other folks who are involved in other committees in the legislature, and so we're starting to make a difference, not just with legislation, but with the system itself, and that makes a huge difference. Teresa Alonso Leon is going to be stepping into the, I'm not going to say large shoes because I think she's online, but the shoes of Representative Margaret Doherty as she's leaving, and Teresa Alonso Leon, I believe, is taking over as the chair of the Education Committee. We are making a difference, and a lot of that is because of what we were doing before, but now, because of the things that took place regarding George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and the others who we continually have a new person each week who has been shot and killed or seriously injured because of the real change that we need to see in the general philosophy of dealing with public safety. Many folks call it law enforcement. I found it interesting. One of my friends is the former mayor and former police chief for Portland, Tom Potter, and he was very clear about it. He thought that we should no longer talk about it in terms of law enforcement because that assumes that that's the only thing that police are doing is enforcing the law. In fact, they are there for public safety, and he wanted to change that approach. He calls folks peace officers, and he wants to make sure that people are in fact looking at it that way. I agree with that. I'd like to see us really looking at this in terms of being peace officers, because the issue for me is safety, my safety and the safety of other people in the community, especially frankly, young black men who are targeted for one reason or another, both in not only in terms of police, but in our culture. We see that as, if you look at who are the bad guys across the culture, you will see that that's the case. So we've got to be changing some of these things on a broader basis. But within the legislature, we're looking at a number of things that are looking at accountability, finding out what discipline is available, how it's meted out in terms of police officers, and when they use force, are they excessive use of force, tracking that, training folks on not only how to be a police officer, but what that means, including things like implicit and explicit bias. We have that going on. We have to figure out how we're recruiting people. I always tell the story that one of the concerns I had long ago was the fact that whenever you talk with a police officer and they'd say the reason they wanted to be a police officer was because they wanted to catch the bad guys. Well, if that's what they want to do, then they're going to start looking for bad guys, not protect and serve, but catch the bad guys. That's a recruiting question that I think is important, and we have to look at who we are recruiting. as well as understanding just what we really need in terms of being police officers. It's not, they are, most police officers never fire their gun, but we spend a great deal of time believing that the myth that that's what they're primarily going to be doing. So if we're asking them to overburden themselves by doing social service work and psychological counseling and sociology and all of these other things, maybe there's some other folks who can come in and do those things without the need for a police officer to show up with their particular training, because their training really isn't in psychology or sociology. It is training to try to deal with law enforcement or public safety in a different way. So I think those are the basic approaches that we're taking, in addition to trying to address the issue related to militarization. Since the war on drugs began, we have seen an incredible increase in the weaponry that's available. Now, police officers will tell you that the reason that that's the case is because they were, in a number of cases, they were outgunned in situations around the country. That's very true. But what has happened is you sort of question why a small town in the middle of Oregon needs a military vehicle that is a personnel carrier, and why they need to have bazookas and other things, because they now can get them as surplus material. So we need to look at the militarization, as well as whether they're being set up so that they look as intimidating as possible, because one of the issues we deal with is police officers are taught on a regular basis, either in the academy or outside the academy when they're on the street, that their job is to be in control of everything and to intimidate people as much as possible. That ends up creating an anxiety level that is a severe one for a lot of people. And I'll just end on this. One of the basic issues for me is when I see a police officer or a police car behind me, or if I'm stopped, I truly wonder whether I'm going to live the rest of the day or not, no matter what, because I don't know what the attitude might be behind that police officer. He's going to see me, and how that's going to be, or she's going to see me, and how that's going to be translated into their fear component. So we're trying to make some changes. You're going to see a lot of bills that are going to be looking at those issues, as well as bills related to racial bias and how we handle that in the schools, and obviously in education, but also in terms of healthcare and housing and a number of other issues that we're finally getting put together, because the virus has done something else. It has pointed out the serious disparities that we have in our system, and we're trying to get some things to address those things. So expect to hear more from the BIPOC caucus and our colleagues, quite frankly. We're getting a lot of folks who want to deal with issues like qualified immunity and other things that relate to all of these issues. And so it's good to see that kind of approach taking place as well. I'll stop there because I will talk too long. Thanks.
That's excellent. And we were hoping that the two of you might be able to riff off each other's statements and kind of see, what else you might have to react to.
Mike, you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I had to unmute there, trying to look at the chat and figure this all out in the Zoom world. I think some of the things that we have seen that have been challenging for our office, around police accountability, it's been a major theme. And I think, when people talk to me and they say, Mike, when are the protests, when is it going to stop? When is it going to end? And I think, unfortunately, that's been a lot of people's focus. But I think what I've seen is that people are still looking for the police accountability side of things. And I hear that from people who talk to me who are out on the streets, who are protesting, or who support protesters. And so, some of the things that Senator Frederick has been talking about, the accountability measures, that's what I think is the key, is that the community actually needs to see that there's accountability, and it's accountability for the entire system. It's not just police officers, although they are getting a lot of the attention, the focus, but it's prosecutors like myself in our office and Department of Corrections and otherwise. So, you know, I think as we've looked at charging decisions, which is our piece of the puzzle, you know, we're trying to hold ourselves to a standard that is being considerate of making sure that we're always doing it with what Senator Frederick said, public safety in mind. And I think that's where we're trying to move, is making sure that if we are going to do something, if we're going to pursue it, we're not just doing it because it's the way we've always done it or the way that, you know, we have no choice. There's been a police report, there's been an arrest, but does it really increase public safety? And so, you know, talking, Senator, about some of the things that you're saying, you know, I've heard, and I know you have too, conversations where people come up to me and they say, I will know that there's more public safety when I feel comfortable with my kids being able to walk to the park, to walk to school. And I have people of color, Black people, have come up to me and said, Mike, when my kids feel as safe as you feel with your kids walking to school. And so I think that's where we're trying to go, and looking at disparity is a big piece of that puzzle of being transparent and honest, but really focusing towards public safety. And so with the defund conversation and everything else that people bring up, to me, that's what the conversation is how do you increase that safetiness? And that's health safety, and it's education safety, it's food safety, it's all of those issues. So those are some of my thoughts for what Senator was saying.
Well, and I'll sort of respond to that to some extent too, because what Mike is talking about is really, we're talking about changing a system. And the system is a much broader thing than just the arrest record. It's a much broader thing than even the demonstrations that you see, which, by the way, I've gone down to as well, and I've watched. I have not been down there for a few weeks now, but there are some. There was some commonalities, and we can talk about that at some point. But I think the system thing is important, and we actually know how to do some of these things. One of the things that happened, I always like to go to this particular bill. In 2017, we had a bill that passed that was looking at profiling, tracking who was being approached, who was being pulled over by police, and why. And so that bill was, they tracked that. They discovered that, in fact, it was clearly a racial disparity when it came to the Portland police. And there was some concerns about a few other departments as well, but the Portland police were well known for this. And that's not a surprise to anyone. But there was a part of that bill that I consider to be really an important factor that is often not understood. Part of the bill talked about possession of a controlled substance, and it moved the possession of a controlled substance from being a felony to a misdemeanor for the first 2 times that somebody was charged with it. And it also included a treatment component to it as well. Well, they saw something happen. What happened was there was an incredible drop in the number of people who were being charged with possession of a controlled substance. Now, in the African-American community, that went from 300 per 10,000 to 50 per 10,000. That's an incredible drop. And the Multnomah County DA's office was a big part of that. So I went and I talked with some of my friends who are police officers, and I said, tell me why this is the case. And their answer was a really curious one. They said that they had a kind of a tally that they did, that they compared against each other in the locker room. And the tally was how many felons they managed to bring in. But if they stopped someone and it was only a misdemeanor, it wasn't worth it. Now, that tells you a whole lot more than just what the drug situation was like. It tells you that they were clearly going after people because of their race, because they thought they could get something, they could find something, and then they could get a felony conviction. But it tells you something else too for me. It means that you did not have as many people with records, with felony records, which meant they were not having to deal with housing issues and job issues and education issues and business loans. They could get those loans with the misdemeanor charge. They could not with a felony. That does something else. It's a much larger, it has a much larger ripple in the pond. It says you are able to have a job. You can get schooling, you can get education, you can get a house, you can get a loan on a business, and you can have a family. You can structure a community that has a family around that. That's a much larger system issue than just a particular arrest record or something like that. That is what we're looking at. That's what I'm looking at. A broader system change. It's going to take a lot to do that, but that's where I'm going with it.
Well, thank you both very much. I think you've got us off to a great start. I will mention again that I know there are some questions that have come into the chat, and I also have a few that were sent to me ahead of time. So if you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and I will be going through those in a moment. I want to take a minute to please welcome some of our legislators and other elected officials that are with us today. I want to recognize Senate Majority Leader Rob Wagner is with us. Representative Margaret Doherty is with us. And Bridget Brooks, who is City Councilor from the City of Tualatin. If I missed you, drop me a note in the chat and I will recognize you. Sometimes it's a little hard to tell from people's names or phone numbers. So with that, I think we're going to go to some questions, and I know we've gotten some good ones already. So I know there was one question specifically about changes to mental health court in Multnomah County. So if you would like to comment a bit on that, Mike, we can start with that, and then we'll go to some more.
Yeah. So one of the great things about Multnomah County is we have a lot of specialty courts, and specialty courts are a evidence-based, rigorously evaluated intervention. We know that they work, but our mental health court has had some challenges publicly, has had some challenges, and has had some personnel issues and some other things. So we have not yet, because of where we are right now with the COVID pandemic, we're not doing the traditional, a lot of the specialty courts aren't operating like they normally would. Obviously, people aren't coming into court to be seen in front of a judge where a lot of people would congregate. Some of the courts, they are doing check-ins, like we are right now over Zoom. And so they're able to do that, but it is at a lower frequency than normal. So these aren't normal times. But that actually does give us an opportunity to kind of dig in and see what was working and what wasn't. So I haven't dug into yet the mental health court, and that's it's a everybody around the table conversation, not just a district attorney decision-making part, but working with the county. And I've already met with our county health director. She's fantastic. And so I'm looking forward to not only continuing those conversations. I've talked with Steve Allen from OHA. So I think we can have a broader conversation around, what are we really trying to accomplish, which is, getting people mental health help so that they don't end up back in the criminal justice system. So I don't have any specifics. I think it's a conversation that needs to be rebooted. It's been a little bit not as urgent just because of the COVID pandemic and things not operating at a time like in normal times.
We have another question about, and this is what I'm actually personally interested in. So there's a lot of post-prison barriers that we've set up, and this is both, a lot of it is legislative. So I would be very interested in knowing, Senator Frederick, are there things in the works where we're looking to stop the process where we continue to penalize folks after they have completed their sentence and any probation period You mentioned a few before where people can't get certain benefits, et cetera. So is the Oregon legislature looking at that?
Yes, we are. We are. There are a number of bills that are looking at that, looking at issues regarding expungement of convictions, as well as looking at some of the fees and fines that people, after they have served their time, they come out of prison and they still have to pay certain fees and fines, and how that is done. Because what you end up doing, of course, is basically setting them up for failure once again, because if you expect people to start paying these things right away, you're creating some significant problems. That's one of the things that I worked on before. We set it up so that, in fact, there were court fees that people were paying upwards of $12,000 to $15,000 when they got out of prison. And they somehow were supposed to start paying that within a 60-day period of time after they got out of prison. We've set that up so that that can be done by way of some community service issues or working with a program, so that you're not having to have that hanging over you, and not having to have bill collectors coming and trying to try to get you to get some money, or having your wages garnished when you are starting a job. So those are some of the things, but there are a number of approaches dealing with similar kinds of things from different legislators. We had there's a long list of some of the bills that are being proposed right now by way of some of the BIPOC folks, as well as some of the new people coming in. There are a couple of people who are specifically interested in that issue, who are probably coming in as new legislators, new senators, new representatives. I've talked with some of them. This is something that they recognize has been a barrier to folks who were trying to get themselves going, but had to somehow now jump over other barriers just to stay afloat. So I'm sorry, I mixed metaphors there, but that's the kind of thing that people are looking at. We're basically trying to find out how we can help, not just keep people in a constant anxiety level. Great.
There was another question regarding some youth justice bills that passed in the legislature. The person writes, Measure 11 youth are now brought before juvenile court for their initial appearance. I'd like to know a few things. What data is being collected on these cases? What new policies are there about waiving a youth to the adult court? And what attitudes are shifting in the DA's office? So, yeah. Mike, I think that's yours.
Yep. So that's right. It was Senate Bill 1008 was passed in 2019 session, and that's gone into effect fully at this point. It took a little while for it to come online, and it's completely changed the way that we handle juvenile cases in this office. For the most part, for the vast majority of Measure 11 cases, we are typically not seeking waiver into adult court. The cases where we have considered it are the cases that have the most damage and severity. And typically the ones that, since I've been DA, that we have discussed seeking waiver have been cases of murder, homicide, or cases where the youth was involved in very serious crimes over and over and over again, and the youth system had already proven not to be a successful way for them to be rehabilitated. But even those cases, once we think and we begin the process of considering waiver into adult court, that really starts the ball rolling on doing assessments. And part of the legislation is really looking into the brain development of the youth who is before us. And so you take into consideration all kinds of other factors. Age, of course, is an important one. Are we talking about somebody who is 14, 15 years old, or 17, almost 18? A lot of maturing can happen in just those couple years. Also, what is their decision-making like? What accompanies that? Other information, school, how were they doing, IEPs. So it really begins the process of us trying to, and working with experts to have the youth evaluated to see where they are in their brain development and the maturity level, because that's what the legislation requires. So I think it's had a major impact on how this office is looking at these cases. We are now only considering waiver in the very, very small in the very most serious cases. And even then it's just okay, now if we are considering do it, let's actually look into the individual youth, get an individualized assessment, and then come back and determine whether or not for public safety reasons, we think that seeking waiver is the option that we need to pursue to protect the public. So it's being very used extremely sparingly. The data on that is a good question. In terms of statewide, I'm not sure that it's being holistically tracked, but we will be tracking it in this office to look at what cases we are making those decisions. But you'll see it's in the very small few that we are.
Thank you.
I need to say at least one thing about that. This took quite a bit. 1008 was a very difficult and long process. In fact, it was the last bill that Jackie Winters presented on the floor before she died, and she never came back to the floor after she managed to pass that particular bill. It took a long process, but I think it points to the kinds of things that we are trying to do, which is to change from a general punishment level to try to be smart, because we know that people are going to be coming back into our communities. Young people are going to be coming back into our communities. How do we make sure that we're doing the best thing for them? And part of it came about because of visits to different prisons and other places, and the kind of effort for different jail systems, etc., discipline systems around the world, both in terms of Louisiana, but also places like Norway as well, and Denmark. So we saw some changes, and people came back and said, why don't we look at it in a different way? And that's what we began to see.
Thank you. Would either of you like to comment on the Portland Measure 26217, establishing a police oversight board through the charter amendment? And the question is, will it be different than what we have now, or is that still to be determined? Do you have any thoughts, either of you?
I'm supporting it. But it has parts of it are part of what we see in a couple of the bills that we have in the legislature as well. So we'll see. It is trying to get to the idea of accountability. It is a tracking, looking at the discipline, and really understand what is actually taking place when it comes to police officers around the city, but around the state. So this comes about because of incredible frustration that in many cases there were situations where people could not get the full information. There seemed to be things blocked in terms of what was going on. So I'm supporting it. We'll see how it works out. There are lots of details that still need to be dealt with, but the basic concept is to finally have some teeth behind a community review board of one form. So I like that.
Mike, did you have any comments on it?
You know, I see the next question kind of is a nice segue, and about how does my office handle cases with police officers and our function in that system. And so, you know, I think that to me has been a challenging area. We in this office do not have a special prosecutor or special unit that handles cases with police officers. And they just go into, when we have a case involving a police officer as a defendant, those cases typically go to one of our units that frequently also handles cases where police officers are our victims. And it's no secret that district attorneys and police officers have good and close relationships. We're co-workers, and that's necessary, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it does become problematic when we are asked to objectively evaluate and consider prosecution of a police officer. I think that there is a need, either internally or externally, to have an independent person take a look at police officer cases. We don't have the resources to do that at this point. It's something that I will like to continue conversation with our county, with the legislature. There have been conversations around whether or not the Attorney General should handle certain cases where officers are involved in fatal shootings or otherwise. I think that those are important conversations because, you know, I believe that our office handles cases with integrity and has for, you know, as long as I know, but it's only right for the public to wonder and be suspicious when the same prosecutors who are friends with the police officers on a daily basis are the ones now being asked to prosecute them. I'd like to see some resource be put into to have a prosecutor that can just handle those cases. We're not there yet. So right now, the answer to the question is when one of those cases comes into us, they just come into the office like any other case does, and they go to the unit that is a serious crimes unit, and they evaluate it like they would any other case. But that's something I'd like to see change.
My first bill in 2011 was dealing with what I called a tiger team approach to do investigation of police officer and excessive use of force. I submitted it in 2011, 2013, 2015, 2017, 2019. I'll be submitting it again because the approach that we need is to have some group at the state level actually do the investigation for situations where we've had use of force by police. That hasn't been approved yet, but it's the kind of thing that I've been looking at for a while. I think that we need to, as Mike said, we need to have somebody who is going to be external from the investigation. Has to be external from the county and certainly the police bureau that's involved in this. And so I've suggested that it be right now. I've suggested that it be someone who is no longer not only external from that county, but actually not contiguous to the county. Not their county jurisdiction is someplace else, so that we are not having to worry about this kind of potential situation where people are perhaps connected with one another in one form or another. So I think we're going to see something. That's one of the bills that you'll see that'll be presented. How far it'll go, I hope it'll go further than it has the last few sessions, but I think we'll see something. And there's clearly discussion about finding a new investigation system for use of force and defining use of force. That's one of the issues as well.
So I'd just like to combine a couple of questions. There's going to be a lot in front of the legislature this next session. Obviously with the economy, the fires, change in administration, which we don't know whether that's continuing of the same or something new will impact decisions, I'm sure. Where do you see the racial justice bills and the work that you and other members of the team are doing, the caucus are doing in Salem, Lou? And then related to that, we had a question about how community members can help move criminal justice reform efforts forward. So I think both of those together.
Okay, well, let me just say that I'm obviously, because I'm dealing with politics, I'm an optimist on this situation. I think that we will see some significant changes. The momentum is there. It has continued. It has not been diminished. People tried to hijack it. We saw that taking place in some of the demonstrations, but it did not work. The momentum continues. So I'm encouraged by the BIPOC caucus. And as I said, I think we're going to see some other folks join the caucus. Those issues are going to be at the top of the list. We're going to continue to work on them. What was the second part of that question? I'm sorry.
Oh, the role of community members to help move criminal justice reform efforts forward.
Well, I think we've actually, I always say this with groups of people, what can we do? in your particular community, for instance, I mean, in places like Lake Oswego and Portland, you have organizations that are already talking with one another about these racial issues and racial policy issues. And the racial policy issues are not just dealing with criminal justice issues. They are dealing with a lot of other things, as I said before, in terms of a systemic thing. But you need to, but people, if you want to do some things, you need to be talking with your affiliations outside of the Portland area, out in other places in the state. If you have faith community that you're involved with, you should be talking with that faith community if they're in Bend or if they're in Lakeview. If you are study stamp collectors, or you're doing something like that, contact those folks and say, you know, this is what I'm concerned about. Not you should be doing this, but they need to know that there's someone who they can relate to who is concerned about these issues, and they need to be they need to be able to say that to to my colleagues, not only in the legislature but the elected officials that they're dealing with. If they're talking with elected officials as school board members or city council or county commissioners, they need to know that this is a concern of theirs as well. The State Board of Education has recently passed a bill looking at passing a legislation rules regarding the use of hate symbols in schools and outlawing that. That didn't come about because somebody from the legislature came down and said you should do this. It came about because a group of parents and students and others from across the state said, you know, the Confederate battle flag is not something that we need to be seeing in the schools. It is an issue that we need to figure out how we're going to work on. They began to do that. So we've got to build it literally from the ground up with help from folks who are elected officials, but they need to understand people who are already involved in these issues need to contact their friends and let them know about it.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, you know, I think one of the things that's been a focus of mine is how do I bring community into the district attorney's office? And so one of the very first things I did before I knew I was about to become the DA was set up a community-focused transition team. Now I'll admit I haven't been able to use them as much as I would like to because things suddenly got extremely hectic, but I'm gonna pivot back to that. And I'm thinking about developing that as a formal part of my office and administration, an ongoing community board that can help advise us and just keep us tethered to the issues that people are facing every single day. So that's one way. I think another effort and things that I've been working on is, for the first time ever, this district attorney's office is on social media. So follow us on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and we're putting out videos. And as we roll out reform things that I've talked about, looking at cash bail, working with Senator Frederick on expungements, and I think we're going to be talking about Measure 11 reform coming up in this legislative session. At least I hope we are. And so I think there are going to be a lot of things, and I intend to keep the dialogue going with members of the public so that hopefully you can see exactly what we're doing. And then if you want to get involved, I love receiving that type of mail from people and, wishing us well and good work and how do we get involved. So we're trying to open up communication in a way that we never have before to make sure that we're being as responsive to the community who really owns this office.
Well, I want to thank you both. I know there's still a few more questions coming in, but we're getting towards the end of our program today. But I want to thank you both. I think Willamette Women Dems actually has a very long history of speaking with members of our community about issues around criminal justice reform, the Innocence Project. We've talked on juvenile justice issues in the past, and I know that we're all horrified by what the experiences have been this summer, but I think we're very pleased that our community is stepping forward and that we have leadership in both our legislature and in places like the DA's office. And I know that, Mike, you have some peers that are also very interested in reform at the DA level around the state. So it's, the more the more those of you become prominent, then the more it encourages other people to run for DA who have similar goals. So we're really looking forward to some really positive movement in our state. And I really want to thank you both, both for your time. Before we close, I do have some announcements for people. Our next program will be on November the 12th, 9 days after the election. Joining us, as he frequently does after general elections, will be Jim Moore, the professor of political science at Pacific University. He will help us make sense of what we have experienced on election day and its aftermath, nationally, statewide here in Oregon, and at the metro level. Dr. Moore is a well-known analyst on all things political. So be sure you register either on our website or when you receive our email notice. And please feel free always to share your invitation with friends. The plus of Zoom is it makes it quite possible for many people to join us. And we have had wonderful programs like we had today. And I know there's many of your friends that would be interested. Just some important election dates again. The 13th, next week, is the last day to register. So if you know someone who is not, please remind them. Ballots begin being mailed on the 14th, and election day is the 3rd. Your ballot must be received either at the elections office or in an official ballot box by 8 o'clock, no exceptions. Upcoming events, the Clackamas County Democrats Roosevelt Gala is this coming Saturday, October the 10th at 7 p.m. You can RSVP at theclackamasdems.org. And the Washington County Democrats Newburger Gala will be Saturday, October 24th at 5 p.m. And you can RSVP at washcodems.org. Thank you all for attending, and we will see you on Zoom again next month. Thank you very much. Have a good day.